And welcome back to the Hot Lap, where we are talking Adrian Newey and Ayrton Senna. Yes, Ayrton Senna, one of the greatest of all time. And Adrian Newey basically went on a podcast, the kind of like the official F1 podcast. It's called Beyond the Grid podcast, where they obviously interview people. And he really opened up. So he opened up about his huge regret after the death of Ayrton Senna, and PlanetF1.com have done what I think is quite an interesting story on him. And Adrian Newey believes he completely messed up the switch from active suspension back to passive suspension in 1994. So from 1993, Alain Prost, the 93 world champion, had the luxury of active suspension, like a really clever suspension that helped you ride those curbs really well. And in 1994, we went for passive suspension, which made that Williams, as Adrian Newey said, very difficult to drive. And the current Red Bull chief technical officer, who was going through another dominant patch in his career at Williams. I mean, he'd just come off the back of the early 90s, just come off the back of the 92 and 93 dominant seasons with both Mansell and Prost. But the 94 season, it struck tragedy when, as most of us know, three-time world champion Senna lost his life at Imola after an accident at Tombarello, and this was just a day after the death of that same circuit of Roland Ratzenberger. Like the darkest, I think, weekend, one of the darkest weekends, if not in Formula One history. Now, almost 30 years on from that weekend, New admitted that the Williams that year was aerodynamically unstable after the huge rule changes were made to try and reel the sport's dominant force in at the time. Though Senna's car control he's described as quite extraordinary. Now, as we know, Senna left his long-term relationship with McLaren in 1993. He did have, I think, McLaren's last win up until the 97 season, where he won in Adelaide. That long relationship with McLaren, and he wanted to go to Williams. Now, the innovation of active suspension played a key part in that. But when it was outlawed, the switch back to passive made the Williams a hugely different car to drive. Now, in the first instance, Newey, having worked with several different world champions throughout his esteemed career, he elaborated on how Senna was different to the others. He said, it was obviously a very short relationship, unfortunately. Newey told F1's, this is what he said on the Beyond the Grid podcast, but he said, I suppose I'm not as bad as I used to be on this, but part of my competitive thing was that when you have somebody like Ayrton that you're up against, battling year after year, then you kind of not demonise him, but he's kind of the enemy. I imagine something similar at the moment to what Mercedes feel like, and Hamilton and George Russell, to Red Bull, Christian Horner and Max Verstappen. But Newey went on saying, so I met him occasionally, but never really talked to him until he first visited the factory at the end of what must have been 1993. So there he is, and he said he was introduced to him straight away, and it was, can I see the wind tunnel? So he walked around the wind tunnel again, straight away. He's down on his knees, he said, looking underneath the car, wanting to explain what we'd done differently, what was different about this car to the previous car, why had he done this, etc., etc. He was phenomenally inquisitive, and if you think about that, other world champions have pretty much been the same. Think of like Michael Schumacher. Think of even like Lewis Hamilton recently said he's going to the trip. They really want to know. Newey said you could argue that he didn't even need to know that, but for him, he just wanted every bit of information he could possibly have, because that might be useful to him at some point in the future. He went on to say, I think probably more than any other driver that I've been involved with, that I would say is what I found unique about him, let's say. So the 94 car, he said, was one of his huge regrets. And this was regardless of the accident at Imola. Even before that, he kind of intimated that he regretted it. The one thing you could definitely say about the car, it was aerodynamically unstable, Newey said. He went on to say, we'd had 2 years with active suspension, and it's my fault. I completely messed up the aerodynamics of going back to that passive suspension and the much bigger ride height that it has to cope with. He said it was a very difficult car to drive, and the bumpier the circuit, the worse that became. And of course, Imola was quite a bumpy circuit. So what he did with that car was quite extraordinary, and he could do that in qualifying. But in Brazil, he managed to put it on pole. But Newey said in Brazil he managed to carry it, but spun at the last corner near the end of the race, extracting that performance from it. Now, Newey compared him to Damon, saying Damon didn't try to extract that level of performance from it, and so he finished the race, but he knew it was unstable. Now, Ayrton Senna's confidence, Newey said, and self-belief in his car control, he would always try it. His car control and his concentration were quite extraordinary. And I think it was. I mean, he is one of the greats. He is one of the fastest, people say, drivers. One of the best one of the best qualifiers. I mean, when you look at looking at his stats, Grand Prix entries 162, Grand Prix starts 161, wins. He won 41 wins. That's a 25.5% win rate. Win rate from pole 29. That's a 70.7% win rate. Winning fastest lap, a 24.4% win rate at 10. Winning got the hat tricks, wins, pole, fastest lap. He got that 7 times, which is just over 17%. Podiums, nearly half his career, he's finished on the podium. 80 podiums, which is 49.7. Pole positions, and this is where one of his biggest numbers came in at 64 to 40%, just over 40%. 4 out of 10 races he raced, he was on pole, and his pole to win ratio was 29 at 44.6. And this is in an era where drivers, there were more. The reliability, for example, was not as good. He had 19 fastest laps, 610 points, but you can't really compare that to Formula One now, when they had 9 points, for example, for a race win. 86 front row starts, and obviously he was disqualified, interestingly, 3 times, but he won 3 world championships, and you kind of have to wonder how many more championships would he have won had he not passed away. I think, looking at the way the 94 championship ended, definitely 94, and then we know that Williams was good in 95. Damon Hill didn't really make the most of it. I think Senna would have done good in 96, good in 97, and then Renault, that was Renault's last year. Then we had the McLaren dominance of 98. But in 97, would he have retired? He potentially could have won 94, 95, 96, another 4 world championships. And funny enough, that magic 7 number, 4 plus 3 being 7. Yep. I passed my maths GCSE. That would have been amazing, wouldn't it? That would have been really interesting. But he does talk about that 1994 season, which is quite, let's be honest, which is quite an interesting one. I mean, as you can see, that's the start there. That's the start there in Brazil. Now, the 94 season, it was the subject of sweeping rule changes. Notably, a lot of banning of electronic aids, such as we've got no active suspension, which obviously helps over those curbs, no traction control and launch control. And interestingly, though, from the start, there were suspicions of foul play, mainly from that Benetton team, and that's said to have troubled Senna. For example, instead of returning to the pit area after his first lap on his retirement at the Pacific Grand Prix, Senna opted to stand near the first corner and watch the cars complete the race to see if he could detect whether any banned traction control system was used. And he returned to the Williams pits after the race, suspicious that Benetton car was illegal. And I think that's one reason where Newey basically talks about the fact that poor old Ayrton Senna, he was trying so hard against this other car, and he ended up, I mean, that's him retiring from the Brazilian Grand Prix, his home race. Near the end, he was trying so hard, and he just couldn't match this Benetton, which he suspected had this traction control. Now, I appreciate we can deep dive, go into that in maybe another video, but those suspicions he had, there was a traction control setting or system on that 94 Benetton. But I think the issue the FIA had with that system was they were like, well, yes, we maybe have that, but you can't prove it. Which ended up why I think that ended up with the FIA really penalising Benetton any which way they can, with Michael Schumacher being banned for a few races in relation to the plank underneath the car wearing a bit too much. But here's Senna, that's at the start of the Pacific Grand Prix, and he was basically 20 points behind Schumacher coming into Imola, where, to be fair to him, despite that disadvantage, I think that many believe the Williams had, and he ended up getting pole on his last 3 races. And this is him losing it at that with one of the Ferrari drivers, pretty much on the first lap. So Ayrton Senna and Adrian Newey opening up, which he doesn't really. So I suggest that anyone, if you want to, I strongly suggest that you listen to that Beyond. Here it is, to that Beyond the Grid podcast. And also, if you want to, our driver tier list is available for the Japanese Grand Prix. Have a look at that. That'll be at the end. I'll link that at the end of the show. But here is F1 Beyond the Grid. This Red Bull's legendary designer Adrian on the secrets behind his immense success. He doesn't open up too often about Ayrton Senna. Quite a closed book. I imagine it's quite painful for him and the Williams team. And so there obviously is Ayrton Senna's complete stats I was talking about for anyone. But interestingly as well, Netflix confirmed, if any of you didn't know, in this gentleman here, his name is Gabriel Leone, and he'll play Ayrton Senna de Silva for the first on this Netflix miniseries. He'll portray the story, it says, of adventure and triumph for the man who became a Brazilian national hero and conquered the world, both on and off the track. Now, the film has produced by Jules Goulet, I'm not too sure if I pronounced that properly, sorry, but it's got the active participation of the driver's family with the Brazilian filmmaker Victor Amorim. I probably got that wrong again. I'm so sorry, Vicente, who also directs the series. And he said it's huge responsibility and also a great honour to be able to represent an icon who inspired so many people throughout his life, showing the world Brazilian sporting talents. Knowing that we will bring this story to millions of people in so many countries through Netflix inspires me to see this as one. It's 6 episodes, and over the 6 episodes, Senna will reveal the personality and personal relationships of the 3-time F1 champion, showing the trajectory of triumphs, disappointments, joys, and sorrows. And it begins in the early days of Senna's motorsports career when he moves to England to compete in the Formula Ford, concluding obviously with that horrible accident in Imola. If anyone has seen obviously the F1, the Senna documentary, which quite rightly won quite a few awards, I strongly suggest you do it. I mean, pretty much be able to look at it on Amazon to rent. And I tell you what, with a bit of a Senna wig, I think potentially good, quite casting there. I'm really looking forward to that. I don't think we've had a release date for it, but hopefully we will be getting one soon. But I mean, Ayrton Senna, one of the greatest drivers of all time, and there he is in his McLaren overalls, waving the Brazilian flag. He did so much for Brazil, just like I think some of the other Brazilian drivers before him. You can make an argument. I think when he did pass away, it was like a national funeral, such was his fame. We've had Felipe Massa and Rubens Barrichello since. His nephew's obviously been in Formula One, but that ended up being not as successful, let's say. But his nephew does look a bit like him, doesn't he? It's quite frightening, really. I also remember, also Jarno Trulli when he had the helmet on. If you quickly took a glimpse, it was very Senna-esque, let's say. But there we go, one of the best drivers, and Newey opening up. Listen to that F1 Beyond the Grid podcast. Anyway, this has been the Hot Lap. Thank you so much for listening. We will speak to you soon. Thank you very much.